Okay, this is air conditioning day, so we're going to talk about 609 certification. Everybody, before you leave here, even if you're not taking air conditioning, if you've already taken it, you need to get 609 certification. And 609 certification is really important. I've got it, Brian's got it. Brian, that we got y'all just talking to, he's got 609 certification.
We all know what
Yeah. And, there we go. You still need to go over the free downloadable study guide and review it before taking the $20 online test. Now, my experience has been lately is that whenever you give it your credit card number, it tells you it's going to cost you $20, but when you get the bill, it's only $12.
This for air conditioning?
Yeah, for air conditioning. This is makes you legal to work on air conditioners. If you're working on air conditioner, you don't have this, you get in trouble. Certification test has 50 multiple choice questions. All the information necessary is in that study guide. It's a free download. And a technician that successfully completes it, you've got to make an 84 to pass it. Okay, you got that? This is not one, like some of these ASE student certification tests that you can get by with a 50. This one here, if you make it, you got to make an 84 or higher. I had one guy that took it that made it an 82 and didn't make it, so we had to go back and take it again.
How many times can you take it?
83 and a half.
Many times you don't pull out your credit card and give it to them. All right, anybody that services motor vehicle air conditioning vehicles must be certified. Service of motor vehicle air conditioning includes repairs, leak testing, topping off air conditioning systems, as well as anything else you got to do to get the AC compressor off and out of the way. You need to be certified. Well, if the EPA guy walks in, if they decide they want to drum up some money, they come over here and say, "Where's your certification?" Well, I don't have it, but the guy that owns the shop does. Not good enough. Bam! You get hit with a big fine. Section 609 is regulated by the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. Failure to comply could cost you and your company as much as $27,500 per day per violation. I heard $33,000. And there's a bounty of up to $10,000 to lure your competitors, customers, and fellow workers to turn you in for a violation. Service technicians who violate the provisions of the Clean Air Act may be fined, lose their certification, may be required to appear in federal court. You're covered here under me. Because I'm an instructor at school, you're covered here, but you're not covered, even if the guy in the next service bay is got it, and the guy on the other side's got it, and the guy that owns the shop's got it. If you're the one that's doing the work on the air conditioner, you're in hot water. So take the test, get the card, keep it in your wallet, wave it in their face if they come in there and they walk away. But don't violate it. It's not okay, even if you got an ASCO certification, to let refrigerant go into the atmosphere. All right, so to recover is to remove refrigerant in any condition from a system and store it in a container. Recovered refrigerant may not be returned to the motor vehicle unless it's first recycled or reclaimed. Now, the machine that we've got reclaims it and recycles it, and it's got a filter in there that has to be changed every 150 pounds of refrigerant. To recycle is to clean refrigerant for reuse by separating oil and removing moisture by passing it through one or more filter dryers. Like I say, our machine's got all that stuff on it. So recycle refrigerant may be returned to the motor vehicle air conditioner. The elements considered contaminants are limited to moisture, refrigerant oil, and non-condensable gases. So if you've got moisture, refrigerant oil, and non-condensable gases, you can actually filter those out. If it's got something like butane and propane and other kind of hogwash in there, you can't get that out. So to reclaim is to process refrigerant to a level equal to new product specs as determined by chemical analysis. Reclaimed refrigerant has to meet standards set forth by the Air Conditioning Refrigeration Institute, Standard 700-93. Reclaimed refrigerant is intended for sale and may be used in any application. And there's your little code of federal regulations down there. Now, the EPA has approved the use of two types of equipment: recover, recycle, and recover only. Now, this bottle right here means the gas is non-reusable blend, which typically means that it's got R12 and R134 mixed. You can't filter those apart. Propane, butane, all that kind of stuff. If you find that stuff in there when you do your refrigerant analysis, and you have to pump it out with your dedicated machine, you're going to put it in a bottle that's painted like that, yellow and gray, so that it won't be reused. The recovery recycle equipment extracts the refrigerant, cleans the refrigerant on site. Our machine does this. Now, recover only equipment extracts the refrigerant into an approved container, but it does not filter it, and it doesn't get the contaminants out of it. If the refrigerant to be reclaimed, the recover only, or it's got to only be used for you can't just use it with any and every refrigerant. So, got to be certified by EPA approved independent standards testing organization. That's ETL or UL, and there's your Society of American Engineers thing. These folks create funky numbers. The SAE people, The equipment standards were SAE J1990 for refrigerant 12 and SAE 2210 for 134A. Now, you're going to see these J numbers. Have you ever heard of the J1930 regulation? When we're in emissions, J1930 regulations, what they came out with in the 90s, it said everybody had to have the same scan tool port, everybody had to call their sensors the same thing, everybody had to have basically the same code, format on their codes and all that kind of thing. That was basically not related to air conditioner, but it was related to emissions. But I mean, these people have all that, A motor vehicle air conditioning industry sponsored research project said J2210 was the older standard for these machines, but as much as 30% of the refrigerant would remain in an MVAC system with 2210 recovery equipment indicated all refrigerant. In other words, you may have even seen this machine we got here. Whenever it's a cool day, you can tell it to recover it. It'll go all the way down there, it'll go into the negative, then when you walk away for a few minutes, it comes back up. And I'm not talking about vacuum, I'm talking about recovery. They'll never hit recover whenever there's nothing in there but air, or you'll pump air into the tank. We don't want that. So anyway, if it goes all the way down in there and you walk away, that refrigerant's trapped in that oil like a Dr. Pepper, and it starts bubbling out of there, and it outgasses, and so you got to finish pulling it out until it doesn't do that anymore. Now, a lot of the times they know people aren't going to want to do that, but you might notice that was canceled November 2010, and it says that recovery, that 2210 standard was considered not good enough. And so here's 8 mistakes you should never make. You should never not identify system refrigerant. You got that? Never do that without identifying system refrigerant. Use the right lubricant. If you pick up any kind of refrigerant lubricant, I have seen people that when they're doing a conversion R134, occasionally they'll just pull out the 12, put different fittings on there, put 134 in there without even being concerned about the wall. Actually supposed to change the accumulator and a bunch of other stuff when you do a retrofit. But basically, if you're going in here, you've got to put the right kind of oil back in there for R134. Make sure you put the right kind of oil in there. Because the old R12 oil doesn't mix with 134, you'll burn the compressor up and all kinds of other stuff. Improperly recharging the systems, that's not the right way to do it anyway. Okay, somebody tell me, we talked about this a little bit before, if I've got one that I'm not sure, and I'm thinking maybe, somebody worked on the Ford Fusion the other day. Which we don't want y'all to do that Ford Fusion. Not you. I mean, you did something else electronic. But whenever it came in there, I think you did it. The Ford Fusion, that he put that electronic part on this morning.
That was hers, right?
The same one, the same car.
I did it.
Oh, you did it. So what you did was you pulled out what was in there and made sure that you had everything out that was in there, and then you put the right amount back in. Well, you got to keep track of what you pulled out when you put it back. You get it charged right. You got it? But if you just add a little bit, you can wind up with too much in there. You see? All right, so not using approved refrigerants. They used to be selling some old cheap stuff over there that had all kinds of, flammable gases in it and all that. It's not good. Components with incorrect performance specifications. Use cheap parts, you're going to have problems. Not performing a thorough system evacuation. Like incorrect performance specifications means like, I can make this condenser work if I put it on there as a tie wrap, but it's not as big as it needs to be. That's not a good thing. If you don't perform the thorough system evacuation, you're going to have trouble. You got to get all the air out of it. Now they claim if the longer you vacuum it, the more likely you are to get all the moisture out of it, because moisture basically turns to steam whenever there's no pressure and all that. Improperly flushing the system when it comes time to flush it. There's flushing equipment you can get that doesn't really cost very much. That you run some AC flush through there and catch it in a can and all that kind of stuff. And not checking for leaks. Checking for leaks is a good thing you need to do and all that. So. A better standard, more complete recovery. 2210 was replaced with 2788. Now, a lot of the 2210 machines were pretty doggone good machines. Now, what a lot of people don't know, and what this thing's not telling you, is if there's a 2210 machine in your shop, let's say that I have a 2210 machine here, and I want to get rid of it. I'm not allowed to sell it. I'm not allowed to give it to another shop. It has to be scrapped. Because they don't want it out there anymore. Now, if you're using it, you're grandfathered in. But if you give it to another shop, and it actually is being transferred from you to somebody else, you're breaking the law. That's not supposed to happen. Huh?
They give you money when you scrap it?
No. Oh, well, the scrap people will. Now, you don't have to scrap it unless you're getting rid of it. You can use it as long as you want to. But you can't sell it, you can't give it away, you can't let somebody else have it. There was a parts house over there one day that was had a that I walked in there. I'd been to the Mobile Air Conditioning Society convention, and that's what they told us up there. There was people up there that, you know, that knew their stuff about this air conditioning stuff, and they says you're not allowed to transfer ownership of that machine to anybody else. And they had one in the parts house up there that I saw, and I says, this machine is illegal to sell. You know that, don't you? Well, they didn't want to hear that. I don't know what they ever did with it, but I said, you're not supposed to sell a machine that, you know, one of the older machines. But anyway, it's hard to look at these and tell the difference between them. Really, you know, you got to basically look at the specs that come with the machine to see what it is. That SAE standard replaced 2210 with 2788. 2788 is the newer machine. Now there's another one coming for the new refrigerant, but we'll talk about that another time. Recover only equipment extracts refrigerant but doesn't clean it. You know, we've got one of these things out there that I use for a dedicated machine to pull blends out with, but I don't just do recover only with it. I use it to pull blends out in one of those gray and yellow bottles. 2209 for 12 and 1732 for 134A. That was till September 16, 2008 when the EPA replaced standard 1732 with 2810. Remember those numbers? There'll be a pop test on them tomorrow. Okay. All right. Recovery of blended refrigerants requires a dedicated piece of equipment. This is kind of like what we're talking about there. See, they're showing a dedicated piece of equipment. And of course, I use another machine like that other one along with the tank like this. And it's a violation of EP regulations to recycle these blended refrigerants. You know, if I see 12 and 134 mixed, I pull them into a dedicated bottle and I put it over. The problem is getting rid of that dedicated bottle is really hard. You're probably going to store it for a long time. I was talking to the Safety Clean people. I says, what would you charge me to carry away a bottle of this blended refrigerant? And they said $2,000. That's pretty scary, isn't it? All right. EPA requires they be sent to a certified reclaim facility. I don't know where one of those is. Even the air conditioning refrigeration guy over here, he don't know what to do with the refrigerant. He's recovered it, you know, he can't use. Now, what the heck is in here? When a technician encounters a mystery refrigerant, it's got to be recovered using a piece of equipment dedicated for the purpose. Unapproved refrigerants may contain a lot of flammable substances. As a matter of fact, our machine, our refrigerant identifier that we got, will actually tell you if it's got a flammable hydrocarbon in it, like butane or propane or something like that. You ever notice how when you're refilling your propane or your butane bottle, how it gets really cold? I mean, butane, if you got an oil that'll work with it, will work for refrigerant. It's just not good. What about the canned air, you know, that you get from the, you know, to blow off your computer with? You know how you can turn it upside down and to freeze something and all that? You ever use that in the shop?
Not for no air conditioning.
No, I'm talking about like if you're going to break something. Like if you need to break a piece of metal, and you turn that can upside down, you spray it on, you can make it so cold and brittle that you can whack it with a hammer and it'll shatter like a piece of glass. You know, it's doable. All right, so propane, butane, the fire hazard may result, boom, gonna blow up. See that? That was a nice explosion. I had to really get my camera really fast to catch that. Okay. All right, so anyway, now H1234YF, HFO34, is really, really expensive. It's expected to become the preferred refrigerant. And you see these bottles right here? You see those bottles? Notice how they're a different color. They're not light blue, they're not green, they're white with an orange top on them. Okay? This is tetrafluoropropene. Say that 3 times fast. Tetrafluoropropene, tetrafluoropropene. Can you say that 3 times fast? Or you could say HFO1234YF. Easier to say than tetrafluoropropene. This is a hydrofluoro olefin with the formula CH2. There's your formula down there. Been proposed as a replacement for 134A as a refrigerant automotive air conditioner. It has a cooling capacity that's somewhat comparable to HF134A and is more or less compatible with HFC 134A components. Now that doesn't mean you can retrofit. Of course, even if you could retrofit, who wants to pay $100 a pound for enough refrigerant to put in your car when it may leak out? Right. It does have a flammability factor which will need to be addressed prior to its adoption as a substitute. And as I remember, Volkswagen and Mercedes said they weren't going to use it because they said it was too flammable. I don't know if that's changed. That's the last I heard. There may be people that know more about
So
this.
they're using flammable gas to put in air conditioning.
Well, R134 is flammable too. It's not flammable, but it's not as flammable as butane or something, but it does have flammable properties. If you take 134A and you happen to put it in a place where you can check it for combustion, you'd be surprised it will burn. The refrigerator in your refrigerator will burn. You know, so it's really difficult there. But that is, they claim it's not that flammable. I have not tested it, but there is a flammability factor that's there. Recovery cylinders, you notice this? You see the two knobs and the two ports on the top and the little air bleed port? That's what those look like. Recovery cylinders have at least, and incidentally, 134A is going to be the light blue bottle. You see my light blue bottle out here? Recovery cylinders have at least two ports, one vapor and one liquid. The EPA is concerned about overpressurization. Remember what I'm always telling you guys, when you're putting refrigerant in our machine out here, you basically don't need to fill it all the way up. The EPA requires a refillable refrigerant cylinder must not be filled above 80% of its capacity. I have 13-pound cylinders on the machines out there. And that's why I'm saying, you know the story of the tortoise and the hare? You remember that? Have you heard that? You know what that means? That means when you start filling the machine up with refrigerant, say, I think I'm going to go, you know, puff on a cigarette or get some coffee or talk to the guys over here. Next thing you know, you come back and it has overfilled your tank because you walked away, you know, and all that. So you make sure that you're paying attention to that. Stay there and babysit that thing. Don't walk away when you're doing it. All right. Now the safe filling level's got to be controlled by mechanical flow devices, electronic shutoff or weight, and all that. But anyway, before you start transferring recycled refrigerant into an empty storage cylinder, you have to pull non-condensable gases out. Now, what's a non-condensable gas? And what does it mean for it to be non-condensable?
That means you can't
Compress it.
compress it.
That means it won't turn into liquid. And that means if it's air, if you've got air in an air conditioning system, suddenly you have an air compressor. And your pressure will just go off the chart because your air compressor, you know, your air conditioner compressor is going to operate like that. Okay, the cylinder's got to be evacuated at least 27 inches of vacuum. Refillable cylinders must be UL or DOT approved and must be hydrostatically tested and date stamped every 5 years. That's the blue ones like I showed you there. Now this is a disposable cylinder. That looks familiar. It looks like some of the ones I've had out there. Or before disposing of an empty cylinder, you're supposed to get all the refrigerant out of it. And the way our machine does, it will actually tell us that the source tank is empty. And this one we got here is pretty strong about getting everything out of it. Attach the cylinder to the recovery unit, remove all remaining refrigerant. Once it's been reduced from a pressure to a vacuum, it should be marked empty, or if you can't spell empty, put the two letters MT on it and everybody will know that means it's empty, okay? If you don't know how to spell empty, then you know how to, it's ready for disposal, right? All right, there. If shipping and transporting cylinders containing used refrigerant, the Department of Transportation requires you attach a DOT classification tag and place the refrigerant label on each cylinder so everybody will know what's in there. The deal, refillable cylinders used for transporting recovered pressurized refrigerant must be DOT approved. All right, you can look at that now. This is stuff is coming. You're gonna, if you take that test, a lot of this stuff I'm telling you is gonna be on that test. You got me? Of course, when you do the downloadable study guides, you can actually look in there and brush up on that. Some states require shipping procedures to be followed based on the classification of used refrigerants, and you got to check with your DOT and EPA for the state of origin. Now, during service or dismantling, the containment of the refrigerant is mandatory. Like if you've got a vehicle that's crashed, that you got to go in here and the air conditioner's got refrigerant in it, you got to hook that stuff up and you got to get the refrigerant out of it before you scrap the car. And just let it hiss out into the atmosphere. Don't ever open a system without allowing proper recovery procedures as set forth by SAE J1989 for TFC12 and 2011 for 134A. And that's about salvage vehicles. The following procedure will serve as a guideline of refrigerant recovery. Always operate their equipment according to manufacturer spec. Now, hooking up to the service ports, whoopee, this is not complicated. When the recovery unit shuts off, wait 5 minutes to make sure all of it's been removed. I was talking about that before. You may think it's all the way done, but some will bubble out of there and you got to make sure you get it all out. So, you know, do it several times. On my Jeep one time, I had actually been pulling the refrigerant out and putting it back in, you know, just as a sort of a vehicle to show. And I'd pull it out and I'd put it back and I'd pull it out and I'd put it back. And one day I said, well, I'm going to replace the compressor. So I hooked the machine up, pulled it out. 1 1/4 pounds what it's supposed to take. And I went in here, sat down, and wait for him to bring the compressor, and just left the machine hooked up, and it went back up, and I pulled out some more, and it went back up again. I pulled out some more, and I wound up pulling 2 pounds out of my 1.25 pound system. And here I was wondering why why it wasn't working right. Okay, repeat the recovery operation until it remains at stable for 2 minutes. Stable meaning that it doesn't drift back up into the positive, right? All right. The high, low, and center hoses must have shutoff valves within 12 inches of the service ends. Shutoff valves can be manually operated or closed automatically when the hose is removed. When we take our hoses off, when we screw that thing off, when we pop the hoses off, we have actually trapped whatever refrigerant's in the hose so that it can come out. Ours are right on the end. Well, they don't want you taking your refrigerant hoses off and then going out there because there's a pretty good bit in there. Sometimes you'll have like a 96-inch hoses and all that. They got a lot of refrigerant in there. When the gauge set's removed from the vehicle or charging source, it's got to be connected to recovery equipment to bring the refrigerant out of the hoses. So remember that if you're using the gauge set instead of the machine. Now, approved recycling equipment has to meet all of the criteria recovery equipment must meet, and it's got to clean the used refrigerant to a minimum purity level as defined by SAE standards. And here's the standards here. Moisture, 15 parts per million by weight. Refrigerant oil, 4,000 parts per million by weight. Now that's 12. 134 has got different. And non-condensable gas, which is air, is 330 parts per million by weight for this and 150 parts per million by weight for 134. All right, you got that? So, and then of course, it's got an inline filter desiccant package. What is the desiccant?
Lesson? Oh, what?
Desiccant.
It's some kind of value.
When's the last time you saw some?
Last time I saw something?
Huh?
I'm seeing something right now.
Well, you're seeing something on the screen, but are you seeing some desiccant right now?
I don't know.
Sure.
What do you do if you desiccate something?
Crap on
No, that's a different word. He actually perverted the word, you know, made it into something else. Desiccate, that means you dry it out. Okay, so what is a desiccant? How many of you guys, if you look behind you up there, you'll see those receiver dryers? They got little round beads in them in this bag. That's desiccant. How many of you have opened a bottle of pills and you see this little thing here that says do not eat? That's a desiccant. It basically keeps the pills from getting wet and getting all moist and everything. Since refrigerant dissolves in the oil, the measuring system must take into account the dissolved refrigerant to prevent overcharging a vehicle with new lubricant. If you get too much oil in there, guys, it is not going to work right and it'll have to be flushed. Seen that before.
Why do they put in bags and beef jerky?
Huh?
Why do they put in bags and beef jerky?
Because they want to get the moisture out.
But it's already moist.
I know they want to get to make sure that the water doesn't get in there and compromise it. Before charging a
The
vehicle,
bags.
I don't know if I've ever seen that in beef jerky.
Yeah.
You've never seen that beef jerky?
Well, I mean, I've eaten a lot of beef jerky. They must have just started putting it in there or something.
I think it's powdered bag.
But, I'm not saying they don't put it in there. I'm just saying I ain't never seen it in there. You know.
Maybe you ate it.
Hey, the beef jerky I get from Gene doesn't have it in it.
You must have
It's all
ate the
made.
bag, Ricky.
Huh?
You must have ate the bag with it.
Usually I do. Okay, so recycle, before charging it, the refrigerant container is going to be tested for the presence of non-condensable gases. Air won't condense, turns the compressor into an air compressor. Some of the refrigerant recycling units have a device that automatically purges non-condensables during cycling. You know this machine out here, they'll say clearing, you know, it's a system like that. And so if the equipment does not have such a device, the refrigerant can be tested for non-condensable. Now look at this. It's got to be stored. This is pretty important, guys, so pay attention to this, because you're going to see this table, you're going to see some questions off this table when you take your test. The container must be stored at a temperature 65 degrees Fahrenheit or above for a period of 12 hours out of direct sunlight. Install a calibrated pressure gauge with 1 PSIG divisions to the container and determine the container pressure with an accurate thermometer. Measure the air temperature within 4 inches of the container surface and compare the container pressure and temperature to determine if the container exceeds the pressure limits found on the table. It's in the study guide. I know it's going to be difficult to read it right here, but this is your temperature. This is your 130 at maximum allowable pressure. Whenever this pressure falls outside of the table, you know that there's stuff in there that, you know, there's some gases in there you don't want. Okay, although the EPA has not mandated leak repair, when servicing an automotive air conditioning system, you should repair leaks whenever possible. Now, some states do require leak fixing. Before you start a service job, the technician should perform a thorough vehicle physical inspection and leak check the system. Tubes, aluminum lines, couplings, fittings, rubber hoses, condenser. Service fittings are a very common leak point. Compressors, very common leak point, right? Evaporator, not so common, but it still happens sometimes, all right? Always leak test with the engine off and without fans blowing. If you got fans blowing, guys, if you're using an electronic leak detector, it's going to blow your refrigerant array and you ain't going to find your leak. All right. Sometimes leaving an AC system sitting all night will make a leak easier to find because the refrigerant's heavy and will settle in low places. We used to do that at Ford place. When we had one, we were having trouble figuring out where it was leaking. We'd leave it sitting there all night long with no fans blowing or anything. Come in the next morning and sniff around with your electronic tester, beep, 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 and then you could find it, you know. Only a small amount of refrigerant is required to perform a leak test. The gauge reading of 50 psi is all that's needed, below 50 degrees Fahrenheit. Leaks may not be measurable though. That's 50 PSI may not be attainable. Now they're talking about really cold weather typically. You can usually get 50 PSI. Don't contaminate the tip of your leak detector. Don't run there and cram it into a wad of grease because that's what's making it not work right. And don't use cleaners or solvents because your detector may pick those up as refrigerant. Spraying brake parts cleaner and stuff like that, may mess you up there. They visually inspect it, look for signs of air conditioning oil leakage because that's a good indicator that there's a leak there. Damage, corrosion, all lines, hoses, and components. Each suspected area should be carefully checked. I will tell you what though, if I've got me a piece of plastic, stiff plastic line that's rubbing against an aluminum air conditioner line, which one of those is going to wear out first? You'd be surprised how many times that plastic will rub into that aluminum. And I guess it's because it picks up dirt and turns into a sandpaper. You've seen that before? Yeah, it just rubs right on through there. You can actually have a piece of plastic and rub a whole piece of aluminum.
Or if you let Brian charge your air conditioning, he'll bust rubber hoses for you.
Yeah, that was basically just crappy hoses you had. Nothing wrong with what Brian did. All right. If a hose is found, continue to check the remainder of the system, or if a leak's found, rather. You had me said hose instead of leak. Okay. Each area checked, move the probe tip location around 1 inch per second. You go move the line about 1 inch per second to see if the thing will pick up the sniff, and you're basically going to try to go all the way around. But if you think you have a leak, blow it with your air and then smell it again and see if it lights off again. Now this is an electronic leak detector. And now to do your evaporator core, listen to this because it's important. Operate the air conditioner with the blower motor on high for a minimum of 20 seconds. Shut it, everything off and wait for the refrigerant to accumulate. Insert the leak detector into the blower resistor block or the condensate drain hole if no water is present. Now, if you take your blower resistor block out, you can stick it up in there. See, sometimes you can pull the coolant fan out. The fan out up in there. If the detector indicates a leak, the evaporator. Also, if you've got oil or dye, if you're using dye coming out your evaporator drain, and that's something that you got there. After it's been opened for repair, it ought to be properly leak tested before you recharge it. The system ought to hold a deep vacuum of 27 inches or more for 1 minute before charging. If it won't hold a deep vacuum, a minimum amount of refrigerant or nitrogen enough to produce positive pressure can be put in there and you can bubble it.
I've had air conditioners leak before and you can pull a vacuum on it and it will hold the vacuum.
Yeah, that's because it's a pressure leak. How much pressure is going to be on how much of a pressure differential do you got when you pull a full vacuum on it? 14.5 pounds. But if you put pressure in there, you're going to have 70, 80, 100 pounds. So you can see how much difference pressure is. You're not going to be able to match the high pressure on the inside. Alternate method of leak testing is use nitrogen, which is an inert gas, to pressurize the system. That's one that we've worked on here that we put dye in. But that compressor, if you put a bunch of dye in a compressor, and it comes back and it's all painted with that dye, that compressor likes to leak where it's put together. There's a lot of that time, particularly on GM cars. Okay, never pressurize the system with oxygen or compressed air. When mixed with refrigerants and lubricants, oxygen or compressed air can cause an explosion. Boom. We don't want a boom around here, right? All right, pressure and temperature is important. This gives you your low side, your static, and your high side pressure as related to ambient temperature. Give you an idea. Notice at 50 degrees, your static pressure is going to be 45.5, so on and so forth. This is sort of a guideline. It's not totally 100% accurate, but this was a table that they've got included in there. Some states and local governments may have laws stricter than the federal law concerning the issue of leak repairs. And so after you evacuate, dehydrate, and you charge your new refrigerant, and it's got to be the right amount. Remember that. Incorrect system charge reduces efficiency. If it's too much or if it's too little, it's not going to work right. Sometimes you may see foreign cars that you'll have a really good coolant on the driver's side and lousy coolant on the passenger side or vice versa, and it'll be a lot of times because it's low on refrigerant. Just be aware of that. Now this is something that we don't have here because I've used this other machine, but a lot of places will have a scale that you set your bottle on. You zero the scale. After you do your charging, your scale will tell you how much lighter that bottle was than it was before. And so that's basically putting refrigerant into the system that way. We've seen them use that, and then basically then their weight measurements, you basically can do this with your conversion calculator and all that or whatever, so that's not a big deal. Finally, when handling refrigerants or operating recovery recycling equipment, you should wear safety glasses, protective gloves, and follow all equipment manufacturer safety procedures. You don't want frostbite, you don't want to lose an eyeball, it's something that can happen. In the event of, if you got a large release of refrigerant in a confined area, get out of there and let some air blow through there. If you